The Stoneworth construction crew finished the 12-foot stone and stucco screening wall on a Tuesday afternoon in late August. Their foreman signed off on the last grout joint at 4:14 p.m. and drove away. I watched him leave from the seat of my combine, where I was harvesting the southwest section of the wheat. The wall ran 800 feet along what Adrian Stoneworth and her Columbia Vista Estates HOA contractors believed was the boundary between her Lot 1 and my family's wheat farm. The wall was, by their own newsletter, the View Restoration Project, a one-month effort to block, as Adrian had described it on the HOA Facebook page, the ugly cluster of farm structures that had been spoiling her community's Columbia River vista for too long. The wall was sitting 18 feet inside the recorded boundary of my family's property. She didn't know yet. She didn't know my daughter is a structural engineer in Portland. She didn't know that within 6 months, I would have 5 60-foot grain silos along that exact line. Fully permitted, fully legal, sealing her mansion in from 3 sides. What would you do if your HOA built a wall on your land to block your house? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. My name's Ezra Cassidy. I'm 61 years old. I farm 4,800 acres of soft white wheat in Umatilla County, Oregon, on land that has been continuously in the Cassidy family since my great-great-grandfather Bertram Cassidy walked off the Union Pacific in Pendleton in 1882 and bought his first 320 acres for $1.25 apiece under the Homestead Act. The Cassidys have grown wheat on this ground for 143 years. I am the 5th generation. My son Wilder, who is 30 and runs the small organic side of the farm we converted in 2017, is the 6th. My grandson Bram, who is 2.5 and lives with his mother and father in the small bungalow we built for them on the South Ridge in 2022, will, on the slow, patient timing of these things, eventually be the 7th. My wife Vera is 59. She runs a small artisanal stone grist wheat flour mill on the farm called Cassidy Mills that sells direct to bakeries from Portland to Seattle. She has been doing this since 2015. She gets up at 4:30 a.m. on milling days. She makes the best soda bread in Umatilla County. I will take no questions. We have 2 children. Linnea is 33. She is a structural engineer at a small Portland firm that specializes in agricultural and industrial structures. She has a doctorate from Oregon State, a husband named Holt, who is a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Forest Service, and a daughter, Pippa, who is 4 1/4, and has decided, against all reasonable advice, that she is going to be a country veterinarian when she grows up. Wilder, our son, is 30, runs the organic operation, and is married to a woman named Esme, who teaches 3rd grade in Pendleton. Their son Bram is the youngest current Cassidy. My mother Wilhelmina Cassidy is 84. She lives in the original 1886 farmhouse my great-grandfather built. She has lived in that farmhouse continuously since she married my father Bertram in 1959. My father died in 2018 at age 86. My mother continues, with quiet dignity, to make her own breakfast every morning at 5:45 a.m., to walk a half-mile loop along the western fence line at 7 a.m. in every weather Umatilla County offers, and to read the Oregonian and the Eastern Oregonian cover to cover before lunch. That is the household. To the immediate northwest of the farm, on the bluff overlooking the Columbia River, sat the development of Columbia Vista Estates, 32 luxury homes built between 2018 and 2020 by a development company owned by a Bay Area transplant named Spencer Stoneworth. Average sale price, $4.2 million. HOA dues, $26,000 a year. The president of the Columbia Vista Estates Homeowners Association since 2019 had been Spencer's wife, Adrian Stoneworth. For 5 years, Adrian Stoneworth had been writing me certified letters about my grain silos, my equipment barn, my flour mill, my mother's chicken coop, my orchard windbreak, and on 3 separate occasions in 2022, the color of my brother-in-law's pickup truck, which had been parked in our driveway during a visit. Every letter, in its own way, said the same essential thing. My farm was ruining her view of the Columbia River. I had, in 5 years, replied to each letter politely. I had explained, in patient paragraphs, that my farm predated her community by 136 years, that Umatilla County is by act of the Board of Commissioners a designated agricultural preservation district, and that Oregon's right to farm statute is among the strongest in the United States. I had attached, in 3 of the 11 letters, a small color photograph of the same view taken from the bluff in 1923, in which the exact same farm structures she found offensive in 2024 were clearly visible in the foreground. I had received no acknowledgement of any of the three photographs. My father Bertram, in the last summer of his life, had told me he had received similar letters from Adrienne in 2017 and 2018, before he died and the responsibility of replying passed to me. He had, by my mother's later recollection, dictated his replies aloud at the kitchen table, while Wilhelmina typed them. He had said, in the second of his replies, that the Cassidy Farm and Columbia Vista estates would be sharing this bluff for the next 100 years, and that he would, in his own quiet way, prefer that the sharing be civil. Adrian had not, in his last summer, replied. On a Tuesday afternoon in late August, she stopped writing letters and built a wall. I called my daughter Linnea in Portland at 6 p.m. Tuesday evening. She was on her way home from her firm's office on Macadam Avenue. I told her, in 3 sentences, what had happened. She said, "Daddy, send me the survey coordinates. I want to overlay the wall's location on your recorded plat tonight." I sent her the GPS coordinates I had taken from the combine at 4:30 that afternoon. I sent her the certified plat from the Umatilla County recorder. She called me back at 9:14 p.m. "Daddy, the wall is 18 feet 2 inches inside your recorded boundary at the south end and 17 feet 6 inches at the north end. The wall is, on average, just under 18 feet onto Cassidy land along its entire 800-foot run. That is not a boundary dispute. That is a construction trespass on a scale that I have not seen in my career. Linnea, what do I do?" "Daddy, first, call our attorney. Second, take more photographs of the wall, the construction equipment tracks, and the property line at sunrise tomorrow morning. Third, do not, under any circumstances, touch the wall. Let me think about what we do next." I called our family attorney, Margaret Tarkenton, in Pendleton, at 8 a.m. Wednesday morning. Margaret had been my father's attorney from 1992 until his death in 2018. She was 66 years old, ran a 4-attorney general practice firm out of an old brick building on Main Street in Pendleton, and was, by reputation across Eastern Oregon, the kind of small-town attorney that bigger firms in Portland did not want to litigate against if they could avoid it. She listened for 11 minutes. "Ezra, drive into town. I want you in my office by 10 o'clock. I drove into town. Vera came with me. We brought everything Margaret had asked for. By noon, Margaret had the architecture of the case. Ezra, several things converge. 1. Under Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 105, the unauthorized construction of a permanent structure on private property by a third party is trespass per se. You have, as the property owner, the right to demand removal of the structure within 30 days of written notice, and, if the structure is not removed, to remove it yourself at the trespasser's expense. 2. Under ORS Chapter 215, Agricultural Land Use, the wall is also an unauthorized structure under the county's right to farm overlay. 3. Under the Columbia Vista Estates HOA's own master declaration, which I have pulled this morning, any structural improvement undertaken by the HOA on land outside the recorded community boundary requires a 2/3 homeowner vote. There has been no such vote. The wall was authorized solely by Adrienne Stoneworth in her individual capacity as HOA president. She is personally liable. I sat at Margaret's conference table. "Margaret, what about the cost? The HOA spent $340,000 building the wall. Tearing it down will be expensive." "Ezra, you will not pay a penny. Adrienne Stoneworth and the Columbia Vista Estates HOA will pay every cost of demolition, every dollar of restoration to your soil, every penny of legal fees, treble damages under Oregon's agricultural trespass statute, and, in my professional opinion, a substantial settlement for the disruption to your wheat harvest. I would estimate the total exposure to the HOA at between $800,000 and $1.2 million before this is settled." "Margaret, there's something else. Linnea has been thinking about it." "What is it, Ezra?" Linnea is a structural engineer specializing in agricultural and industrial structures. She has been wanting, for some time, to design and build a new state-of-the-art grain processing facility for the farm. We have been talking about it for 2 years and have not yet pulled the trigger because of cost. The Stoneworth's wall, by accident of timing, has just provided us with the financial means and the strategic motivation to build that facility now. Margaret looked at me a long moment. "Ezra, Tell me about the facility. 5 60-foot vertical grain storage silos in a north-south alignment. 18 feet 5 inches inside our boundary, along the exact line of the Stoneworth wall. Margaret smiled the very small smile of an attorney who had been hoping I would say something like that. Ezra, that is 100% legal under Oregon right-to-farm law. Let me get to work. Linnea drove out from Portland on Saturday morning with 2 of her firm's senior engineers, a roll of architectural drawing paper, and a small soft-sided case of survey equipment. She arrived at 9 a.m. Vera made breakfast. My mother came over from the original farmhouse with a tin of her oatmeal cookies. Wilder and Esme brought Bram in his stroller. We sat at the long pine table in our dining room, and Linnea unrolled the preliminary sketches she had made the previous 3 nights at her kitchen table in Portland. She had designed, in 72 hours, a 5-silo grain processing complex. Each silo would be 60 feet tall, 28 feet in diameter, made of welded steel sectional construction, painted the matte gray standard for Cassidy Farms equipment since 1962. Each silo would have a capacity of approximately 140,000 bushels of wheat. The complex's total storage capacity, 700,000 bushels, would represent roughly 2/3 of the Cassidy Farms' annual wheat production at current yields. The 5 silos would be spaced exactly 70 feet apart, in a straight north-south line, along the eastern boundary of the property. The line of the silos would sit 18 feet 5 inches inside the recorded boundary, exactly along the inside line that the Stoneworth's 12-foot wall now also occupied, which would, by the time the silos were built, no longer exist. The complex would include at the south end a 65-foot-tall grain elevator with an external conveyor system that connected to a new truck loading bay accessible from the existing farm road. The elevator and the loading bay would constitute, in the language of Oregon's right-to-farm statute, accessory agricultural processing structures, with no height restriction beyond Federal Aviation Administration regulations. The total cost, by Linnea's preliminary estimate, was approximately $1.2 million. Construction time, with a Pendleton-based contractor she had already pre-vetted, would be approximately 5.5 months. Wilder, who had been silent through her presentation, said when she finished, "Linnea, we have been needing this. I have been begging Dad to build it for 3 years. The fact that the construction would, as a side effect, also surround the Stoneworth mansion with 5 60-foot grain silos is, I want to say for the record, the most beautiful piece of incidental visual symbolism in Eastern Oregon agricultural history." My mother, Wilhelmina Cassidy, 84 years old, who had been quietly drinking her coffee throughout the presentation, set down her cup. She said, "Wilder, watch your language." But yes. Vera laughed. Esme laughed. Linnea said, "Daddy, are we doing this?" Linnea, "Yes, we are doing this." She nodded once. She started her phone calls. By Sunday evening, she had retained the Pendleton contractor, a 3rd-generation industrial construction firm called Homestead Steel that had been building Pacific Northwest grain elevators since 1958 for the design-build contract. By Monday morning, she had filed the preliminary permit application with the Umatilla County Planning Department. By Tuesday afternoon, she had filed the FAA notification. By Wednesday morning, Margaret Tarkenton had filed the trespass action against Adrian Stoneworth, the Columbia Vista Estates HOA, and Stoneworth Construction LLC in Umatilla County Circuit Court. The complaint sought immediate injunctive relief, requiring removal of the unauthorized wall, treble damages under ORS 105.815 for agricultural trespass, attorney's fees, and a separate count against Adrian Stoneworth personally for tortious interference with agricultural operations. By Thursday morning, the Umatilla County Planning Department had granted preliminary approval of our grain silo permit application on the basis of the existing right-to-farm zoning and the established agricultural use. By Friday afternoon, Homestead Steel had broken ground on the foundation footings for the first silo. The wall had been built in 3 weeks. The silos would take 5.5 months. The Stoneworths had no legal mechanism to stop them. Adrian Stoneworth called my landline at 11:14 a.m. Saturday morning, 8 days after Homestead Steel had begun the silo foundations. She had, by my paralegal's later count, called the Umatilla County Planning Department 31 times between Tuesday and Friday trying to file objections to the silo permits. She had been told by Tuesday afternoon that there were no grounds for objection. She had been told by Wednesday afternoon by a senior planner who finally took her call directly that the grain silos were, quote, the textbook example of permitted agricultural use under Oregon right-to-farm law, and the county had no discretion to deny the permit, end quote. I let it ring 3 times. I answered on speakerphone with Vera standing beside me with a yellow legal pad. She said, in the bright, cheerful voice of a woman who had been informed by 3 different attorneys in the previous 72 hours that she had no legal options. Ezra, hi, so good to reach you. I just wanted to check in neighbor to neighbor. I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot here, and I wonder if we could find a way to resolve this without the silos. Adrian, the silos are happening. They are fully permitted, fully legal, and under active construction. They are also a project our family has been planning for 3 years. The wall, which is on our land, is going to be removed by Holmstein Steel as the foundation work for the silos proceeds. The wall removal cost will be billed to your HOA per the trespass claim. There is nothing for us to negotiate. Ezra, surely we can find a middle ground. I would be willing to pay the demolition costs personally, restore your land, and pay you a generous settlement of, say, $200,000 in exchange for halting the silo construction. Adrian, the silos are not negotiable. They are not, frankly, your business. They are a legitimate agricultural expansion of my family's farm that we have permitted and broken ground on. I am responding to your call as a one-time courtesy. After this call, all communication will go through my attorney, Margaret Tarkenton. I hung up. By Sunday, Adrian had organized a Columbia Vista Estates HOA emergency meeting and presented a proposal for a voluntary special assessment of $45,000 per household, totaling $1.44 million, to fund emergency litigation against the proposed agricultural blight project. She got a yes vote of 9, a no vote of 21, and 2 abstentions. The proposal failed. 12 of the 21 no votes contacted Margaret Tarkenton's office the following Monday morning and asked, individually, whether their HOA was at risk of additional liability for Adrian's wall trespass. Margaret told each of them, in plain English, the truth. Yes, the HOA itself was a defendant in the trespass action. Yes, every member of the HOA was at risk of being individually assessed for any portion of the judgment the HOA could not cover from reserves. And yes, the only protection any individual member had was to formally vote, in writing, to dissolve the current board. By Wednesday morning of week 3, 14 Columbia Vista Estates homeowners had filed a formal petition with the HOA board calling for an emergency special meeting and the recall of Adrian Stoneworth. 2 of those 14, a married couple named Wallace and Greta Burkhoff, who lived on Lot 23 and who were, by quiet coincidence, second cousins of Holt Burkhoff, the Holmstein Steel foreman, drove out to my farmhouse on the Thursday afternoon of week 3 to introduce themselves. They brought a small carafe of homemade apricot preserves from the orchard behind their home. Wallace was 78, a retired forensic accountant who had moved up from Portland in 2019 specifically because, in his own words at our kitchen table, he had been looking for a place where, quote, the wheat was still the point, end quote. Greta was 74, a retired registered nurse who had grown up in eastern Washington. They sat at the kitchen island with Vera and me for an hour. They asked me, gently, how my mother Wilhelmina was holding up. I told them she was fine, better than fine, and that she had quietly endorsed every decision Linnea and I were making. Wallace, when I told him the silo complex was permitted, nodded once and said, Ezra, as an accountant I will tell you something I have not told the rest of the HOA. By my read of the master insurance carrier's likely exposure, the HOA's reserves will not be sufficient. Adrian is going to bankrupt this community over a wall she should not have built. Some of us are going to need to step in and govern through it. I appreciated that. They left at 5 o'clock with 3 dozen of our eggs and the open standing invitation to come back any time. They came back, by their own report, 4 more times before Christmas. Meanwhile, the silo foundations continued. Holmstein Steel poured the first foundation slab on the Tuesday of week 3. The slab was 86 feet across, 20 inches thick, reinforced with 3-inch steel rebar on a 1-foot grid. Holmstein's foreman, a man named Holt Burkhoff, who had built grain elevators across eastern Oregon for 31 years, walked the perimeter of the slab with me afterward, and said, "Ezra, by the time we're done here, your grandson is going to grow up looking at silos his great-great-great-grandfather would have recognized as a Cassidy farm built to last." By Friday of week 3, foundations for silos 2 and 3 were poured. By the end of week 4, all 5 foundations had cured. The Stoneworth's wall was, by then, partly already in the construction footprint of the new silo complex. Halmston's crew demolished the first 300 feet of the wall that Friday and invoiced the demolition cost, $47,000, to the Columbia Vista Estates HOA's bonded performance reserve. The reserve paid promptly. They had no choice. The Wednesday of week 5 was the day Margaret Tarkenton called me from her office with a federal envelope on her desk. "Ezra, sit down." I was already sitting. I was in my office at the farm. I told her I was sitting. "I received this morning an unsolicited federal subpoena from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon. They are conducting a parallel federal investigation into Stoneworth Construction, LLC, for systematic permit fraud across 3 Pacific Northwest counties going back to 2017. They specifically asked in their cover letter whether I would be willing to share on a courtesy basis the trespass documentation we have already gathered. They want it because the Columbia Vista Estates wall is, by their preliminary review, the 8th substantially identical construction trespass that Stoneworth Construction has executed in the last 7 years. I closed my eyes for a moment. The pattern, by the U.S. Attorney's preliminary investigation, is as follows. Spencer Stoneworth's company has, since 2017, deliberately surveyed property lines in favor of his developments by margins of between 8 and 23 feet on 8 separate adjacent landowners. He has, in each case, used the same Bay Area surveying firm. He has, in each case, built permanent structures inside the disputed boundaries before the landowner noticed. In 6 of the 8 previous cases, the landowner either settled quietly under pressure or could not afford to litigate. The 7th case is in pending state court litigation in Klickitat County, Washington. Your case is the 8th. I sat at my office desk. The federal investigation also has, by separate review, identified Spencer Stoneworth's pattern as a violation of federal mail fraud, federal wire fraud, and the Federal Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. They believe they have grounds to charge him within the next 90 days. Margaret, what does this mean for our case? Ezra. It means that, by the time the silos are finished 6 months from now, Spencer Stoneworth will most likely be facing federal indictment. The Columbia Vista Estates HOA's master insurance carrier will deny coverage on the trespass claim due to the federal investigation's findings of intentional misconduct, and the HOA will be on the hook for the full judgment from its general reserves and special assessments. Our settlement leverage just went up by an order of magnitude. I sat at my desk. Margaret, has Adrian, in your reading of the records, been a knowing participant in Spencer's pattern? Or has she been a separate actor? Margaret was quiet a beat. Ezra, by every document I have reviewed, Adrian Stoneworth has been a separate actor with her own pattern. Her wall at Columbia Vista Estates was, by every available record, her personal initiative as HOA president. Spencer's company built the wall to her specification, but the decision to build it on your land was Adrian's. The Stoneworth construction surveying error that placed it 18 feet onto your land was, however, the same surveying error pattern Spencer has used on the other 7 properties. 2 separate actors, 1 shared instrument. I nodded. The 5 months between the foundation pour and the silo topping out moved with the slow, patient rhythm that all good farm projects do. I worked the harvest. The wheat came in well that year. Yields were up 4% over the previous season. The Cassidy Farms Small Grain Cooperative paid us, in early November, the highest price per bushel since 2014. Linnea worked the construction. She drove out from Portland every other Friday and worked through the weekend with Holt Burkhoff and his crew. She wore steel-toed boots, the same dark green coveralls she had owned since college, and a yellow hard hat that she had personalized at age 12, when her grandfather Bertram had taken her to her first construction site, with 3 small stickers: a Cassidy Mills wheat sheaf, a Cassidy Farms quarter-horse silhouette, and a small, inked-on flag of Norway, in honor of her great-great-grandmother, Sigrid Halvorsen Cassidy, who had emigrated from Bergen in 1882. The first silo topped out on October 22nd. Holt's crew placed the conical aluminum cap, painted matte gray with the small black initials EC for the farm, at exactly 60 feet 2 inches above the foundation slab. Linnea stood in the south field with Wilder and Esme and Bram in his stroller and watched the cap go on. She did not cry. She did, however, take a long breath that I noticed. The second silo topped out on November 4th, the third on November 21st, the fourth on December 7th, the fifth on December 19th. By Christmas Eve, the 5-silo complex was structurally complete. The internal mechanical systems were installed in January. The grain elevator at the south end topped out on January 17th at 65 feet 4 inches. Total construction time, from foundation pour to operational completion, was 5 months and 3 weeks. Total cost, including land restoration where the trespass wall had been removed, was $1.22 million. Meanwhile, the legal case moved. Margaret Tarkenton filed motion for summary judgment in mid-October. Adrian Stoneworth's attorney filed a hasty opposition, arguing that her wall had been built in good faith reliance on the Stoneworth construction survey, that her HOA was protected by various indemnification provisions, and that the trespass should be excused on equitable grounds because she had not personally intended to encroach. The Umatilla County Circuit Court denied her opposition in November. Judge Calhoun Hartman, who had been on the Umatilla bench for 14 years and who had grown up on a wheat farm 2 counties east of us, wrote in his order that the assertion that an HOA president can authorize the construction of a permanent stone and stucco wall 18 feet onto a neighbor's recorded agricultural land and characterize the resulting trespass as a good faith mistake defies the most basic standards of due diligence required of any landowner in Oregon. He granted summary judgment in our favor on the trespass count. Spencer Stoneworth was indicted by a federal grand jury in late January on 11 counts of mail fraud, wire fraud, and false statements to federal entities, covering the 7 prior trespass schemes across Oregon and Washington. The Columbia Vista Estates HOA's master insurance carrier denied coverage on the wall claim, citing the federal investigation findings. Adrian Stoneworth was formally recalled as HOA president on February 11th by a unanimous vote of the remaining homeowners. The new interim president was a retired oncology nurse named Marlena Tarkenton, no relation to Margaret, although they had served on the Pendleton Hospital Advisory Board together in 2014. Marlena, by everyone's account, was the right person at the right moment. She drafted new bylaws in her first 30 days. She reduced HOA dues by 22%. She apologized, by formal community letter, to me and my family for the wall incident. The damages trial was settled, by stipulation, 3 weeks before it was set to begin. Total settlement, $828,000 against Adrian Stoneworth personally, paid from her personal frozen account by the U.S. Attorney's Office, plus $340,000 from the Columbia Vista Estates HOA's reserves, plus full restitution of all legal fees, plus a perpetual recorded easement prohibiting the HOA from ever again undertaking any construction within 500 feet of the Cassidy property line, without our written consent. The first morning after the 5th silo topped out, I drove the 4-wheeler down the East Farm Road at sunrise to look at the complex from the angle Adrian Stoneworth would see it from her bedroom window. I had not until that morning fully understood what we had built. The 5 silos rose in a near-perfect north-south line, 60 feet above the rolling wheat fields. Their matte gray sheet metal caught the morning light along their entire eastern face. From Adrian Stoneworth's bedroom window on the south side of her mansion, the silos formed a continuous visual wall, extending the entire length of her view to the east. The Columbia River, which had been the entire reason she had bought Lot 1 in 2018 for $4.7 million, and which had been, by her own marketing, the entire premise of Columbia Vista Estates, was, from her bedroom window, no longer visible. The grain elevator at the south end completed the seal. From her dining room window, which had previously looked south across the Cassidy farmstead toward the Blue Mountains, the elevator now formed a continuous 65-foot vertical mass, exactly along her sightline. From the back patio, which had been her favored evening cocktail location for 6 years, the entire eastern and southern panorama was now sealed by 5 silos and 1 grain elevator. She had, in essence, by her own decision in August, to build a 12-foot wall on my land to block what she had called the ugly cluster of farm structures spoiling her community's Columbia River vista, set in motion a 6-month sequence of legal and engineering events that resulted in the same ugly cluster of farm structures being multiplied by 5 and elevated to 60 feet. The view she had spent $4.7 million to acquire was now permanently and completely gone. The silos were, by every applicable Oregon, Umatilla County, and federal regulation, fully legal. They would continue to stand for the next 80 to 100 years. I sat on the four-wheeler for 10 minutes and watched the morning light move across the silo faces. I thought about my father, Bertram, who had walked the same East Road every spring morning of his last 40 years, and who had, in 2017 and 2018, written his patient civil letters to Adrian Stoneworth in the hope that the sharing of the bluff would go quietly. He had not, in the 18 years since he wrote them, lived to see those letters answered. He had also not, in his last summer, been able to imagine that the answer would arrive in the form of 5 60-foot grain silos, paid for by the woman his neighbor had become. I imagined him standing beside me on the four-wheeler that morning. I imagined him looking at the silos. I imagined him saying, in the slow, careful Bertram Cassidy way, "Ezra, that'll hold." That was, in his own peculiar idiom, the highest praise he gave anything. I drove back to the house. Vera was at the kitchen island with her milling apron on. She asked me how it looked from the East Road. I said, "Vera, it looks like a Cassidy farm now." She smiled. By the time I had finished breakfast, 3 more carloads of Columbia Vista Estates homeowners had driven by the silos on the public road that runs along our north property line. By Monday morning, Margaret Tarkenton had received 7 phone calls from Columbia Vista Estates homeowners asking variations of the same question. Was there any legal mechanism by which the silos could be reduced, relocated, or removed? She answered each call the same way. No, the silos are permanently sited, fully legal, and the established Cassidy Farms agricultural use will continue uninterrupted for the foreseeable future. By Thursday of week 1 after topping out, 4 homeowners had listed their Columbia Vista Estates homes for sale. By Thursday of week 2, 6 more. By the end of February, 15 of the 32 homes were on the market. The Stoneworth construction development that Spencer had built between 2018 and 2020 collapsed in market value within 60 days. The average listing price dropped from $4.2 million to $2.8 million. The HOA, under Marlena Tarkenton's interim leadership, did not panic. She drafted, with my and Margaret's quiet consultation, a community recovery plan that included a public statement acknowledging the wall incident, a formal apology to the Cassidy family, and a long-term marketing repositioning that emphasized Columbia Vista Estates' new identity as an authentic, agricultural-adjacent rural community that values its working farm neighbors. The repositioning worked. By summer of the following year, 10 of the 15 listings had sold to new buyers who, by every account, knew exactly what they were buying, and who had, in many cases, specifically wanted the working agricultural views from the bluff. Adrian Stoneworth's home, Lot 1, did not sell for 14 months. When it finally sold, it was for $2.1 million to a Portland family who, by quiet account from the new HOA secretary, specifically wanted, quote, the silo view lot, end quote. The Stoneworths had, at that point, been gone from Columbia Vista Estates for 10 months. They had moved to Henderson, Nevada, in April. The federal sentencing of Spencer Stoneworth was on a warm Wednesday in late April at the federal courthouse in Portland. Margaret had asked, gently, whether I would consider attending as a victim representative. She said the U.S. Attorney's Office would value it. She said the other 7 trespass victims, several of whom had been quietly broken financially by the previous schemes, would value it. I agreed. Vera and Linnea drove up with me from Pendleton on Tuesday afternoon. We stayed at a small hotel near the federal courthouse. We had dinner with Linnea's family at her northeast Portland house. Pippa, age 4 1/4, asked her grandfather Ezra to read her 3 bedtime stories. I read 4. The next morning at 9:30 a.m., we walked into Judge Lucinda Burchard's courtroom on the 2nd floor of the Portland Federal Courthouse. Spencer Stoneworth sat at counsel's table in a charcoal suit. He looked smaller than I remembered him from the 4 times I had seen him at HOA community events in 2019 and 2020. Adrian was not present. The U.S. Attorney spoke for 19 minutes. She walked the court through the 7 prior trespass schemes Spencer had executed between 2017 and 2024. She described, in plain English, how each scheme had been designed to exploit older, less resourced rural landowners who would not be able to afford to litigate. She read aloud, with the careful, steady cadence of a prosecutor who knows her material, the names of the 7 previous victims. 5 of those victims were in the courtroom. She invited me, by name, to speak as the 8th victim. I walked to the small podium near the witness box. I had not prepared formal remarks. The judge looked at me. I cleared my throat. Your Honor, my name is Ezra Cassidy. I am the 5th-generation owner of a wheat farm in Umatilla County, Oregon. In August of last year, Mr. Stoneworth's company built a 12-foot stone and stucco wall on my family's land. We have, in the 6 months since, demolished the wall, restored the land, built 5 60-foot grain silos along the same line, and increased our annual wheat storage capacity by approximately 700,000 bushels. The Cassidy farm is, today, stronger and more productive than it was before the wall was built. I am here today not to ask the court for personal compensation. The settlement I have received is fair and complete. I am here because the 7 landowners whose names the prosecutor just read did not have the resources to do what my family was able to do. They lost land. They lost equity. They lost the assurance that older, small family operations in this region would, in 2025, still be able to count on the rule of law against well-funded development schemes. They needed a court to draw a line. I am asking the court, on their behalf, to draw it firmly. Thank you. I sat down. Judge Burchard nodded at me. She thanked me. She read the sentencing memorandum for 9 minutes. She sentenced Spencer Stoneworth to 4 years and 8 months in federal custody, 3 years of supervised release, full restitution to all 8 trespass victims, totaling approximately $3.2 million, and permanent ban from real estate development in the United States. Spencer Stoneworth nodded once at his attorney. He did not look at the room. He was led from the courtroom by federal marshals at 11:14 a.m. I walked out into the spring Portland sunshine with Vera on one arm and Linnea on the other. The 5 other trespass victims who had been in the courtroom came up to us in the federal building lobby. Each of them, in their own way, thanked me. One of them was an 81-year-old retired cattle rancher from Klickitat County named Peter Halverson. He shook my hand for a long minute. He said, "Mr. Cassidy, thank you. I lost 43 acres of pasture to his company in 2019. I never thought any of this would be set right. Today it has been." The silo complex's formal dedication was on a warm Saturday in early June, 6 weeks after Spencer Stoneworth's sentencing. I had not been planning a dedication. Vera had been the one who insisted. She had told me, 3 weeks earlier at the kitchen island, that the silos deserved a proper opening. She had told me that my mother Wilhelmina, age 84, deserved to see them dedicated with her family around her. The dedication was held in the South Field, adjacent to the silo complex, on the first Saturday of June. About 240 people attended. The Pendleton High School FFA chapter sent their entire senior class. The Umatilla County Grain Commission sent their full board. The Cassidy Mills Bakery customers from Portland sent 4 representatives. The regional Halmston Steel crew sent 12 people, including Holt Burkhoff. The interim president of Columbia Vista Estates sent the entire current HOA board, which Marlena Tarkenton had insisted on. Wilhelmina Cassidy, 84 years old, in the navy blue dress she had worn to her own husband's funeral 7 years earlier, sat in a folding chair in the front row beside Vera. Linnea and Wilder stood on either side of her. Pippa, age 4 1/4, sat on her great-grandmother's lap with a small bouquet of wheat stems she had cut herself that morning. Vera had organized the program. She kept it short. She invited Linnea to give a 5-minute description of the project. Linnea did. She walked through the 5 silos, the grain elevator, the loading bay, the moisture control sensors, and the 80 to 100-year design life. Vera invited Holt Burkhoff to speak briefly about the construction. He did. He thanked his crew. He thanked Linnea. He said the Cassidy Silo Complex was the cleanest grain construction his company had completed in 31 years. Vera invited my mother Wilhelmina to say a few words. My mother stood up from her folding chair. Pippa slid off her lap and stood beside her great-grandmother and held her hand. My mother said, in her quiet, careful voice, "I would like to thank Vera for organizing this. I would like to thank Linnea for designing it. I would like to thank Holt and his crew for building it. I would like to thank my son Ezra for having the courage to say yes when his daughter brought him the plans. I would like to thank my great-granddaughter Pippa for being here today to see something that her great-great-great-grandfather Bertram Cassidy began in 1882 and that we are today carrying forward. My husband Bertram, who died in 2018, used to say that a Cassidy farm is, at its heart, a promise that this land will still grow wheat in 100 years. The silos we have built will help us keep that promise. I am proud of all of you. Please enjoy the afternoon. She sat down. The FFA chapter came forward and presented her a small, hand-carved cedar plaque from their workshop. The plaque read, Cassidy Farms, 5 generations, 1882 to present. My mother received it with both hands. Pippa kissed her cheek. The crowd applauded. We served lunch. The FFA had brought wheatberry salad. Vera had brought 4 enormous trays of focaccia. The Holmstein Steel crew brought 12 cases of beer. We ate together at long pine tables Vera and I had set up in the south field at 6 o'clock that morning. I sat at the head of one table with my mother on my right and Pippa on my left. Pippa, halfway through her wheatberry salad, looked up at me and said, "Pop, is this a Cassidy farm now?" "Yes, baby, it is." She nodded. She went back to her lunch. 1 year later, on a warm afternoon in late June, I sat on the back porch of the original 1886 farmhouse with my mother Wilhelmina and watched my great-granddaughter Pippa, now 5 1/4, ride her small wooden hobby horse in slow, steady circles in the dirt yard. Pippa was wearing the small yellow hard hat Linnea had given her on her 5th birthday. She had named the hobby horse Bertram, after her great-great-great-grandfather, although she pronounced it Bertram, in a way that no one in the family corrected her on. The silos rose, in their north-south line, against the late afternoon sky. Their matte gray faces caught the slanting light. Approximately 350,000 bushels of the previous fall's harvest were currently in storage. Spencer Stoneworth was 9 months into his 4-year, 8-month federal sentence at a low-security facility in Lompoc, California. Adrienne Stoneworth was in Henderson, Nevada. She had, by quiet rumor that reached our small Pendleton circles approximately monthly, become a part-time administrator at a private golf club. She had not, by any account, attempted to contact me, my mother, or any member of my family. Wallace Burkhoff, who had become a small, quiet friend of our family in the previous 12 months, told me at coffee in February that he had heard, through a Portland accounting colleague who knew her divorce attorney, that Adrienne had been quietly furious for months that her marriage to Spencer had collapsed under the weight of a fight she still believed was about wheat silos and not about 7 prior trespass schemes she had not known her husband had been running. She had, by Wallace's account, blamed me personally for the dissolution of her marriage. Wallace had said, when he relayed this to me, "Ezra, you probably already know this, but she was wrong about the silos and she is wrong about you. The blame is entirely her husband's. Spencer's company built 7 walls before yours. He chose his pattern. She chose her wall. They are different choices." I appreciated that. The Columbia Vista Estates HOA, under Marlena Tarkenton's continuing presidency, had reduced annual dues by 31%, established a community wheat festival in October that drew approximately 400 visitors in its first year, and added a small annual contribution of $15,000 to the Regional Oregon Farm Bureau. We founded 2 things. The first is the Bertram Cassidy Family Wheat Heritage Endowment, established at Oregon State University in my father's name. $5,000 a year to an Eastern Oregon high school graduate entering studies in agricultural engineering, sustainable wheat farming, or rural community development. The first recipient is a 17-year-old young woman named Astrid Pelham from Heppner, whose grandfather had been a sheep rancher and whose mother runs a small herbal medicine farm. The second is the Wilhelmina Cassidy Multi-Generational Farming Defense Fund, established in my mother's name and administered by Margaret Tarkenton's firm. The fund provides pro bono legal representation to small Pacific Northwest family farms facing trespass or development encroachment claims. The fund was seeded with $100,000 from the federal restitution. It has already, in its first 9 months of operation, defended 2 small family farms in Klickitat and Walla Walla counties. Linnea has been promoted to senior structural engineer at her Portland firm. Pippa, age 5 1/4, has informed her family that she will be a structural engineer and a country veterinarian and an FFA chapter president when she grows up. We have not, in the Cassidy household, told her that those three careers will be difficult to combine. We have time. Wilder and Esme are expecting their second child in October. They have already decided the name. If a boy, Bertram. If a girl, Wilhelmina. My mother, when they told her this in March, did not say anything for a long minute. Then she nodded once. She said, "Esme, thank you. I would be honored either way." Here is what I learned. When somebody builds a 12-foot wall on your land to block your house, the correct response is not to argue about whether your house is ugly. The correct response is to build 5 60-foot silos, fully permitted, fully legal, that will stand for 100 years and feed the world. The right to farm laws of the state of Oregon, written into the state code in 1981 and strengthened in 1993, are waiting in plain sight for a fifth-generation wheat farmer to read them carefully and to call his structural engineer daughter on a Tuesday evening in late August. And the small private satisfaction of an injury thoroughly and irreversibly answered is, it turns out, one of the very few satisfactions in this life that improves with age. If you have ever had your own HOA story, drop it in the comments. I read every one. If you'd like more stories like this, hit subscribe. Stay rooted. Stay watching. I'll see you on the next one.
That's Columbia Vista Estate. Adrian Stonewall did not lose because A-Rag shouted. They fell because his great-great-grandfather drove a wagon off the Union Pacific in Pendleton in 1882 and bought 320 acres of wheat ground for $1.25 a piece. She fell because his daughter Linnea spent 50 years in Portland becoming the kind of structural engineer who can design a 5-silo grain complex in 72 hours at her own kitchen table. She fell because Oregon's right to farm law, written into the state code in 1981, said exactly what every honest Pacific Northwest small farmer already knew is sad. And she fell because the correct answer to a 12-foot wall on your land is not a fight about your house. It is 5 60-foot silos. The real win wasn't the indictment. It was an 84-year-old farm wife named Wilhelmina standing in a south field at age 85 and dedicating a structural her granddaughter had built. It was a quick-cut county ranger named Peter Halverson finally getting his 43 acres of pastoral back through federal restitution, and it was a 5-year-old great-grandfather named Piper riding a hobby horse named Persian in circle in the dirt yard of the original 1886 farmhouse. If you've ever had a Adrian, drop your story in the comments. I read everyone, and if this is what you need at the end,